I think at this moment I should just accept that visual novels are priced expensively these days, like this one on Nintendo Switch called World End Syndrome, developed by Toybox and Arc System Works of all people. Yes, you heard that right. The same Arc System Works that developed the Blaze Blue, the Persona fighting games, Guilty Gear, Dragon Ball Fighters, and many more. What could possibly warrant them and Toybox to develop a visual novel of all things, and a mystery one no less? And why are there 2 visual novels being released this year with the theme of World's End? Considering that I have uncovered the mystery of one, I think I'm going to uncover the mystery of another. Welcome to appabendyt's Uncapped. Thankfully my world hasn't entirely ended yet. Today's review is going to be on our World is End World End Syndrome. Almost got confused there. A romantic horror and mystery visual novel from Toybox and Arc System Works. You play as a protagonist that you can give your own name to, so I'm just gonna call him Klul's Harem. So Klul's Harem recently moved to a small town to live with his relatives, which means that he has to enter a new high school and meet up with new friends. But strange things begin to happen, such as people dying left and right. It's up to the protagonist to form his own mystery group to find out the truth behind the murders and solve this case for the good of mankind. Persona 4 is one of my favorite JRPGs of all time, and I'm glad that... Sorry, what? Thank you. Now this is the real script for the review. Okay, let me repeat that. You play as a protagonist that you can give your own name to, so I'm just gonna call him Klul's Harem. So Klul's Harem recently moved to a small town to live with his relatives, which means that he has to enter a new high school and meet up with new friends. But strange things begin to happen, such as people dying left and right. It's up to the protagonist to form his own mystery group to find out the truth behind the murders and solve this case for the good of mankind. Wait. Are you sure this is the real script? Okay, uncanny similarities aside, World End Syndrome is another visual novel about the end of the world, and in contrast to our previous end of the world visual novel, Our World is Ended, it's more of a horror mystery visual novel than a cheerful, upbeat one. I played the game for the first time and immediately got the worst ending. Oh me, oh my, oh me, story of my life. Turns out that the worst ending was a necessity to get all the waifus, so the moral of the story is, if you want a waifu, you need to be stabbed many times and die. Actually, no, you shouldn't. That'd be too real. Now, I initially was about to play it in the same way I did with Our World is Ended, which means that I'm playing it without any sorts of walkthrough or guides. I did. And it's not a journey that I recommend, because this game is a lot more complex than I thought. Compared to Our World is Ended, it certainly packs a lot more content, and the routes are sprawling like a freaking rubber band ball. So how does the story progress? Well, it initially starts off with a prologue section to orient yourself and the characters and the setting, but then eventually it progresses to a calendar-based day-to-day system where you get to make a decision on where and who you want to spend your time with for every section of each day. We're not reviewing Persona 4, aren't we? And this is why I said that the game is quite complicating, because there are many combinations that you can pick per day. I ended up just briefing through every choice and every combination just to see what it brings, and after going through all of them, I reload the game and chose the route that I want to pursue. This practically puts the story into a screeching halt and ruins the entire pacing. But you know what I find surprising? Despite me going through every possible choice in every possible time at every possible day, it only took me about 10 hours to get at least 99% of the options, and I know that because the game's handbook has this aura system which tracks all the interactions that you have with the characters. So as long as you rate an interaction with a character, even if it's on a different save, it will still be added to the main character's aura. And thanks to me reloading and retrying every single option, I ended up with a web graph that favors almost all of the characters. But even after I explored every route and every option, one of the characters is actually quite tricky to get because it involves maxing her stats and finding all of her interactions before you can actually get to her route. Oh, and unlike Persona, the game doesn't tell you on who you'll be interacting with, and once you visit one place, you can't get out and visit the other without reloading the game on that same time. So playing the game with a guide is not only necessary, it's absolutely mandatory. But despite the game looking seemingly complex and sprawling with choices, if you only follow one specific route, It's actually quite short. Going back to the rubber band ball comparison, the construction might seem very complex until you disassemble them little by little and find smaller rubber bands that are pretty short. Thanks to me knowing all the events beforehand and going to each and every combination of places, I finished one character route in about 1.5 hours because the game only covers around 25 to 26 or sometimes even 27 days. I guarantee that it'd be much shorter if you're following the game using a guide. You can probably finish the game in about 8 to 9 hours if you're a very fast reader. If you want to listen to the voices, maybe 10 to 12 hours. I honestly prefer the game to just be a traditional visual novel. Pick a route that you want in the prologue, it branches out depending on your preferred waifu, and it will proceed linearly with perhaps a true or maybe even harem ending later on. This Persona dating sim-esque day-per-day calendar basis does give more freedom to the player, but that freedom completely hampers the narrative pacing. Not only that, but the character interactions that you have when you do meet these characters on day-to-day basis are very short and mostly very insubstantial. Being lightly sprayed with water doesn't have the same impact as having one continuous stream being dropped to you. Another thing that makes the game more annoying than it should be is the fact that the game doesn't have manual load and save on the main menu and quick save and quick load too, which means that if you want to reload a save to explore all the options, you have to either wait for the next map prompt where you can do it there, or just quit the game entirely. Funnily enough, the game asks me to save more times than necessary. Maybe a bit of an autosave would fix this? Anyway, the game doesn't track my total playtime, but thankfully my recordings do. And the total playtime that I have on this game is almost 18 hours 47 minutes. Yes, it says 16 hours 47 minutes, but I actually have 2 hours worth of footage deleted thanks to OBS being a dick. That is enough for me to get all the endings, including the true one, explore almost all of the possible options, and finish some of the missions. That playtime is not bad for $40 in my opinion, but good quantity doesn't necessarily mean good quality. So let's talk about whether or not the game's quality is worthy of that $40 price tag. We've talked about how the visual novel structure is questionable at best, but how about the story itself? Is it any good? Well, before we get to that, the CG and the character arts do look amazing. The background animation is particularly very impressive. They legitimately feel like paintings, and some of them are animated too, which is quite rare in visual novels. There are times where I pause the game just for a while and enjoy the calming ambient noise of this small and peaceful town, or at least on surface. So it's visually impressive and the audio is nice. What about the story? Is it any good? Yeah, well, it's complicating. So the game does many different genres at the same time. It does a detective story, it does a romantic comedy story, it does a horror story, it does a slice of life story, and if you're doing that many genres, it's not really that possible for you to be good at all of them. And this game is unfortunately not good at all of them. Not that all of them are not good, it's just that not all of them are good. The game is really good at being a horror mystery. I want to know who the murderer is and whether or not the urban legend of the small town is actually real, and since I'm not much of a horror guy, there are actually many times where I hide my face behind the controller. I don't really like horror games to be honest, which begs the question in why I'm playing this game in the first place, but thanks to the game's rather unintuitive and unnecessarily complicating visual novel structure, it's not that possible for you to enjoy the story at a cohesive pace without any sort of guide. That and the horror mystery part isn't really that prominent until you get to the last 2 to 3 routes of the game, and you cannot get to them unless you play through the worst ending and the first 3 routes, and you need to finish all of the 5 routes before you get to the true ending. So what about the romantic comedy and slice of life parts? They are alright. Thanks to the fact that they're really short, you don't get to bond with the characters that much, and I feel like the characters lack chemistry. I do want to see more moments, and I feel like a month isn't enough to flesh them out, let alone declare love. But with that being said, the waifu options are really good, and they're pretty different from a typical visual novel. I mean, sure, you have the shy, shrinking violet girl and the raging red-headed tsundere, but they're not really bad characters, they just need more time to develop. I also love the sophisticated, rich, aristocratic aristocratic girl and the always happy, always cheerful journalist. I like the kooky and awkward ditzy girl whom you can tell straight away that she's putting a disguise, and a secret incest option if you're into that sort of thing, you sick bastards. But do keep in mind that it's not the kind of incest that you might expect. The romantic comedy parts are just okay, but unfortunately that's like 70% of the game. So I guess the best descriptor for the game overall is that it's just okay, but that's not really being fair, to be honest, because I really love the horror mystery parts of the game. The twist in the end of the game really caught me by surprise, and it does give a satisfying conclusion to the horror mystery part. But the romantic comedy part doesn't provide epilogues that are just as satisfying in my opinion. At least the game doesn't hammer its preferred waifu down your throat. So overall, World End Syndrome is, well, I know it's not really being fair to it, but there isn't really any word to describe it. It's okay. It's surprisingly pretty good, at least on the mystery aspect of the story. The visual novel romantic dating sim aspect was just alright, but when you do get to the mystery, it is legitimately engaging and terrifying too. The game is visually impressive, the characters are likable despite needing a bit more time to develop, and the story overall is intriguing despite having some really wonky structure for a visual novel, and you do need a guide to enjoy this game in a much smoother pace. For $40 on the Nintendo eShop, it's not a bad price, but it could have been a little cheaper. $30 would have been the perfect sweet spot for the game, and on that price, I highly recommend this one. I recommend it for those who enjoy horror, mystery, visual novels, but not so much for those who enjoy something more romantic and intimate. In that case, you might want to try something else. But if you do want to try this one out, I do recommend having a guide ready and just enjoy the ride.